today we're talking about a specific topic which is close to Harry's heart, and it's something that we've been talking about quite a bit over the last couple of years. Again, relates to business execution and business performance, but kind of drills down into some specific areas. So this theme, tell me about it again. I kind of follow the theme that you were following, when we spoke yesterday.
Yeah, sure. Look, it's the front end piece. It's the piece that we often refer to the project pipeline.
Right.
This is for operating assets, by the way. So it's not about new developments.
Yeah. So we're not talking about projects in the traditional sense of the word, like constructing a plant or anything like that. We're talking about improvement type work.
Exactly. This is about how do I move from this level of performance in my current operation to a better level of performance, which tends to be the ongoing annual chase that organisations have.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what we're talking about. Yeah. And clearly to move from here to here, you've got to have some initiatives, some activities. Typically the business improvement domain fits in here, and it's how you populate that space so that you can actually move your performance targets from one level to another practically.
Yeah.
So the biggest problem.
What is the challenge?
Well, the challenge is that I see incessant effort in that space, but there's just so much going on. It's project overload is the term quite often used. There are just so many people running around doing so many things, and quite often not necessarily nailing any one of them. But when you look at what they're doing, a lot of the projects will not deliver that throughput improvement. It seems like there's some, and look, it's not through bad intent, but it seems like there's some confusion, difficulty in identifying the key ones that will make the difference.
How do you know they deliver? Because if you ask people, specifically who are in the project, are they adding value, are they doing something that's important, they'll probably say yes.
Absolutely, everything's important. Bottom line is, are we going to make a difference in that saleable commodity throughput that we're selling to the market?
Right.
And if the answer is no, then maybe that's not a priority. Now there are some exceptions, clearly.
Well, what would they be? Give us an example.
Health and safety.
So risk, safety,
those sorts of things. We're not going to just throw those out. However, there's a whole bunch of other operational type of activities and projects that are not going to deliver that outcome, or the alternative, reduce the cost. Reduce the resources required to deliver the same sort of outcome. If they're not going to do that, then why are we doing them now? Now, that's not to say they may not come up in the future, but we don't need to do them now.
Well, what about if you go upstream and you go to, say, where they get the resource from? So whether it's in the energy sector and they're drilling resource out of under the sea or in the ground or whatever it might be, or mining sector, they're digging material out. They would argue that they're adding tremendous value if they can increase the amount of stuff they dig out and process.
Look, without question. However, what you've got to balance it with is where in your entire supply chain, that process, where is the need most required now? Not everything works at the same level.
Right.
And so what you always find in these processes is that some processes are working reasonably well, others are falling behind. And it's that focus that we need to be able to identify and then target and solve. And that's what a lot of project pipeline processes that I've seen, they don't quite address that fact.
Right. So they can improve in somewhere, but it puts them ahead of someone else, and that's the constraint or limitation to the business.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's about how to identify those and relieve them.
So what is it that's causing that? Because they're kind of caught in this, and I think you see this, certainly in most organisations that I've seen, and in our conversations, the organisations that you interact with. What are the contributing factors that create that scenario?
Well, I think, look, there's a few, but the one that I specifically want to talk about today is nearly like the contracting out of that process.
Right.
Okay, so
which process?
Well, the process of identifying what have we got to do to improve, to move forward. And what I see a lot of organisations do is pay a lot of good money for consulting firms to come in and do that for them. And typically what happens is the consulting firm will come in and go, here's the benchmark, here's the global benchmark, here's where you're performing, what are we going to do to fill the gap?
Right.
They populate whatever is current in their project list into that space, and quite often without any critique or review of whether it's going to actually deliver that or not. And then on top of that, then brainstorm some additional projects to fit it in there. And so a lot of it is done, I would argue, without a real good cause and effect connection.
Right.
And you really need that to be able to pinpoint that you're on the money, that you're targeting the right area.
To put you on the spot a little bit, you say they're benchmarking things. Like, give us an example of what it is they're benchmarking.
Well, it's interesting.
Because there's nothing wrong with benchmarking.
No, absolutely nothing wrong. But most of the benchmarking comes from their experience globally in saying, well, in Australia they're doing this sort of level of performance with an open cut coal mine. South America's this, and so on and so forth, and they're using those tons per whatever hour numbers, or tonnes per week numbers, as a basis for then comparing with this organisation. But the problem also that I see is that whilst tonnes per hour is a good benchmark, potentially, they're also using other metrics like, productivity, number of people, net present value. And all of those go to confuse people. Fundamentally, business is to do two things: maximise the throughput, particularly in commodities nowadays, sell as much as you can, make as much as you can, and do it at the cheapest cost possible so that you return.
That's the goal.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Why have any other metrics? Everything else flows from that.
Right. It's interesting because the end of the day is each of those functions through that value stream have got to be producing at a rate which overall matches what it is they're trying to target through throughput.
Absolutely.
Is it the case that when people come in and benchmark within a function, they throw a benchmark figure at these people, that they can target improvement within that function that drains resources and improves the function itself but adds no value?
Look, absolutely.
In the big picture.
Yeah, that is often what happens. I think the original intent, the initial intent, is usually quite pure. That's end to end.
Right. It's the right intent.
Yeah, that's not rocket science in itself. But I think through the interaction that goes on, there's a bit of losing sight of that.
Right.
So you get down into truck and shovel operations as an example in open pit. We've got this level of performance, and they go, well, that's not as good as what the best ones do, and so now we've got this gap, and let's fix that. Whereas the problem is that we're suffering with our drill and blast or our dozer capacities challenged. It's being able to tackle the real needy area and then prioritising accordingly.
They're increasing throughput in areas that aren't constrained. The constraint's somewhere else.
Absolutely. The additional thing that often happens is that these projects, you call these folks in, and it's quite an expensive process. Very expensive, in fact. And I don't know that the engagement is effective, the organisational engagement to sort of get the buy-in, to get the energy. I've seen a lot of organisations, I follow a lot of these processes. So they do this process, and then I come along, because what happens typically with the process is they identify these projects and then they leave. And now the whole dilemma.
So they're not doing the delivery at the end.
No,
they're just
the dilemma now.
Here's what you need to do, and then dump it on.
And here's what you need to do over 3 years. Is the time frame. Now, 2 points about that. Anyone that can tell me that today I can go in to your organisation and tell you what you need to be focusing on for the next 3 years. Look, I don't know what sort of crystal ball they've got, but certainly I don't believe that's sustainable. Business and processes within businesses are so dynamic that I believe an effective pipeline needs to be virtually constant. Look, I would argue at least 6 monthly, and you can do that internally with your own resources, because the people in the business really do know what the business needs. They just need to be coordinated and using a defined methodology to be able to do that. So that's one piece.